Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. In our last lesson, I have explained you what is meant by aggregate demand and aggregate supply, and we have discussed in detail what is meant by short run aggregate supply curve and long run aggregate supply. Both in Keynesian model and new classical model or monetist model, the shapes are different in both the cases. Now, once aggregate demand and aggregate supply, they have been discussed in details and how these two curves will be shifting rightward and leftward. There are different causes in macroeconomics. Now we move on to another topic that is called inflation, another macroeconomic problem. When inflation is continuously increasing, that will become a problem. Inflation means increase in the general price level over the period of time. When prices are increasing in a short period of time, but they are not persistent, they are temporarily increased, and after some time, after some days or some months, they come back to their previous level, then we say it is not inflation, it is a temporary change in prices, but they are not staying at that level. But when they are persistently and continuously increasing, when prices are continuously increasing, we say now economy is affected by a disease which is having overheating of the economy, or it is having more temperature in the form of higher prices. That is called inflation. So inflation means it is persistent, it is persistent and generalized increase in the price level of basket of goods in a given time period. So keep it in mind, in microeconomics we were talking about a single commodity price, but here we are talking about generalized increase in prices. How prices of all the commodities in general, they are going to increase, and persistent means they are continuously increasing. They are not temporarily increasing and then they stay back to their previous level. When they are persistently increasing, what do we mean by basket of goods? This is not an increase in price of a single commodity, but there are a number of commodities which are used by the consumers. They can be the consumer items, they can be the producer items in that basket of goods, or there are all the goods and services which are produced by a country and their price level in general that is rising. That is called inflation. When it is persistently increasing, then we say economy is overheated, its temperature is increasing, and it has become a disease to the economy. Then the doctors of this economy, the economic managers, the economic policy makers, they will be designing the economic policies in order to reduce this temperature and the overheating of this economy, in order to slow down the prices to grow, or they should remain at a stable level. There should be a stability in the prices to grow. Then we can say the overheating can be cooled down. Okay. Now, why it is important to study inflation as a macroeconomic problem? It is because in everyday's news we are listening that the sugar prices are increasing, vegetable prices are increasing, chicken prices are increasing, and mutton prices, all meat items. and clothing prices. These are the items which are daily used items by all the people. By all the people of the country, whether they are rich and poor, they are going to buy the daily used items. So when daily used items, they are increasing their prices. That means cost of living in that country will become high. Cost of living means how much money is going to be spent in order to buy the basic necessities of life in order to survive. The cost of living will increase when we find that the general price level is increasing
लिंक एक्सपायर हो गया होगा इसका
over the period of time.
एक भी चेयर नहीं करेंगे
इसको लगा दो. Okay, listen now. So we were talking about inflation. So when cost of living is going to rise, what happens? People have to spend out of their income more money on buying the basic necessities of life. Then we say it is causing the cost of living to rise when they have to spend more money on buying the goods and services. Okay. So in that case, when prices are continuously increasing and the rate of growth of prices that is going to rise by more than 20% and 50%. So when more than 20% rate of inflation is there, it is called alarming inflation. That will make the government of that country unpopular among the people of that country. When prices are growing by a very, very fast rate. That the basic necessities which are the daily used items, they are having increase in price levels, okay, by a 20% rate or more than 20%, then sensitivity of this increase in price level can also be heard by the government authorities, and that will make their political weakness, because they are unable to design those economic policies which can control this growth in price level. So when prices they are growing by a very mild rate, there can be a mild inflation. Mild inflation means what? That prices are growing by less than 5%. Less than 5%, between 1 and 5%, we can say this is mild inflation. And mild inflation is not a bad phenomenon. Why is it not a bad phenomenon? The reason behind is that some growth in prices, they are also required. It is because that will give the producers incentives to invest in that economy where prices are having a little bit growth, or there is mild inflation which is present, which is giving incentives to the producers in order to invest. If prices are not growing, there is stagnation, that prices are not growing in that economy, so that will discourage the producers to invest in that economy because profitability is not going to rise more than that. Okay, mild inflation can be desirable for the economy, and one we say that is called a single digit inflation. Single digit inflation, that is below 10%. Although prices are not growing by a mild rate, they are growing by 7%, 8%. So they are having this growth rate, but they are not the mild, but we can say that this is still below the 10%, that is called a single digit inflation. And when it moves on above 9%, that is 10% and above, then it is called double digit inflation. Double digit inflation. So double digit inflation starts from 10% and plus, and below the 100%, you can say the 99%. That can be a double digit inflation. And within this double digit inflation, when prices are growing by 20% or by more rate, 20% inflation, 20% plus, that is called serious inflation. Serious inflation, or it is having the signs or alarms of hyperinflation, that prices they will be growing even a higher rate. So in future there can be the hyperinflation. And what do we mean by the hyperinflation? Hyperinflation means when prices are, according to your book, they are growing by more than 50% rate. Or sometimes we say when prices are growing by more than 100%, or three-digit inflation is also called hyperinflation. So according to your book, we say when prices are growing by more than 50% rate. And in case of hyperinflation, that is a very severe form of inflation. In this case, prices will be changing after every hour. Like 1 hour earlier, you have purchased one commodity, suppose eggs or meat items. So after an hour, the prices will not remain the same; they will be further increased. That is called hyperinflation. Is the most dangerous form of inflation in which money loses its value very quickly, very frequently. Money will be losing its value. The real purchasing power of money will be declining very quickly. So we say when money is losing its value, then what happens? There will be less purchasing power of money. More money is chasing a few number of goods and services. We have a basket of money to buy a few handful of the goods and services. So that means the hyperinflation that will have, we are going to carry money in the baskets, but whatever the goods that money is able to buy, only one or two number of goods which would be purchased. So hyperinflation is causing the money value to lose very quickly, and these are only the papers which are having no worth in order to buy the goods and services. And it took place after the Second World War in Germany, when instead of Deutschmark, cigarettes were used as money, because Deutschmark, the German currency at that time, that lost its all value, and cigarettes were considered to be the most expensive item, and they were used as medium of exchange instead of the currency notes. Okay, recently, a decade earlier, it took place in Zimbabwe, where people were trillionaire, not only billionaire, but they were trillionaire, but they were poor. They were having more currency notes in order to buy the goods and services, but once they went to the market in order to buy the basic necessities of life, so 1 trillion note or 10 trillion notes that was used to buy the small quantity of the goods and services. So hyperinflation, where it takes place, it damages the currency value as well. It is more depreciated and it is having less worth to buy the goods and services in the marketplace. So although people are having more money, but they remain poor because the purchasing power of money has gone down. They are pushed towards poverty in real terms. Although they are having enough income, enough money, but that value of money to buy the goods and services, that is very worthless. So now we have studied one thing, what is meant by inflation and what are the different degrees of inflation. Like it can be mild inflation, it can be single digit, double digit, and another thing which we say that is called hyperinflation. So there can be the two things which I want to explain them. One is called deflation. Deflation means when general price level is decreasing. It is falling general prices of the basket of goods. When prices are falling, or we say the inflation rate, the rate of inflation becomes negative. Like if inflation rate is -2%, that means now the prices overall they have decreased by 2%. prices in general, they are not increasing, rather the prices, they are declining. This is called deflation. And inflation and reflation means when prices are increasing. Reflation and deflation, they are the two different things. In case of reflation, the prices are increasing, but in case of deflation, the price level is falling and the rate of inflation becomes negative. What is meant by disinflation? Disinflation means prices are still growing but with less rate of inflation. What do you mean by? The rate of inflation has gone down. The rate of inflation has gone down. The prices are still increasing but with less rate. For example, prices previously they were growing by 7%, but now they are growing by 5%. They are still growing. In year 2010, the rate of inflation was 7%, but in year 2011, the rate of inflation is 5%, but in year 2012, the rate of inflation is 3%. So in which year do you think the prices will be highest? Do you think in 2010 the prices were highest, or in 2011 or in 2012? We see if a price was 100 in 2010, now it has become 107 after 7% inflation. Now 107 will be growing by 5%. So that will be higher than 107. So we can find that in 2012 the prices will be further increased by that 2011 prices. So we say over here the prices were lowest at the start of the period. We find this type of MCQ in our paper number 1, paper 1. But prices will be the highest at the end of this period because the rate of inflation that has gone down. Prices are still increasing but with less rate. It does not mean that the prices are falling. It means that prices are increasing but with less rate of inflation, and prices will only be declining when rate of inflation becomes negative. Here again cost of living is increasing because prices are still increasing but with less rate. But here cost of living will be decreasing in case of deflation when prices are falling. So falling prices, either it can be due to decrease in aggregate demand, which is very harmful because it will be causing unemployment in the country, and if the prices are falling due to increase in aggregate supply, then it is beneficial and it will be called a good deflation. But a fall, when deflation is taking place due to fall in aggregate demand, then it will be a bad deflation. But here disinflation does not mean that prices are falling, rather it means that prices are still increasing but the rate of inflation that has gone down. So today we have just have the introduction about inflation, what is meant by inflation and what are different degrees of inflation. So these degrees of inflation are important, like whether inflation is mild inflation, single digit inflation, double digit inflation, or there is going to be serious inflation and then hyperinflation. And after this we studied deflation, the fall in prices, and disinflation, that means when rate of inflation is going to decrease. I am not starting the causes of inflation and types of inflation today, because if I start them and then this topic is discontinued, that will not be better learned. So do practice these concepts at home, study them, browse your internet and see whether there is there any difference between deflation and disinflation, and what are the harmful effects of hyperinflation in an economy, and how will it affect the cost of living. So today we have discussed all these things, we have explained them, and by tomorrow I will be doing the causes of inflation, and then how inflation can be measured. So first we will be doing the measurement of inflation, then the causes, and then consequences of inflation will be considered. And by the end of this week, I think so, inflation topic will also be over. And by the next week, we will be starting international trade. That will be the last topic of this topic, this chapter number 4, and then we will be moving towards the end of your syllabus as well. Thank you very much. That's all for today.